I've learned that humiliation doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it arrives dressed in a smile, wrapped in the silk of family tradition. And when your family measures your worth by the seat you're given at the table, being placed at the back with the caterers feels less like a slight and more like a sentence. I'm Claire Whitmore, and I used to think being quiet was the safest way to survive in this family. When your brother runs your father's company and your stepmother treats you like background furniture, you learn to smile through the insults and sip your water while everyone else toasts champagne. But on my father's 70th birthday, I learned something about silence. It isn't a weakness. It's a strategy. Because while they laughed at the failure daughter sitting with the caterers, I was already holding the one thing none of them knew existed: control. That night, the chandeliers over the Whitmore Country Club sparkled like they were mocking me. My father's 70th birthday. The entire ballroom glittered with laughter, champagne, and polite cruelty. Ethan, my older brother, the golden son, was at the center of it all, shaking hands, collecting compliments like trophies. I stood near the back, holding a glass of sparkling water, trying to look invisible. Claire, sweetheart, my stepmother, cooed, adjusting her diamond bracelet, would you mind sitting with the caterers tonight? The main table's a little full. For a second, I thought she was joking. But then Ethan turned his mouth, curving into a familiar smirk, and said, "Yeah, that's fine. She'll be more comfortable back there anyway. Isn't that right, Claire?" Every head at the long mahogany table turned toward me. The laughter softened into something worse: pity. I swallowed the burn rising in my throat that felt like hot metal and forced a smile. "Of course," I said. My voice was steady, even though my hands were trembling slightly around my glass. Wouldn't want to ruin the seating chart. That's how my father's birthday began, me sitting among servers in crisp black uniforms, pretending not to notice my own family celebrating 50 feet away. The waitstaff whispered apologies as I joined them. I wasn't angry at them. They looked at me with the kind of sympathy that comes from people who've spent their lives being overlooked. One of them, a young waiter named Lewis, pulled out a chair. "You sure this is okay, ma'am?" I nodded. "It's fine. I've eaten in worse company." From my seat, I could see Ethan charming the guests, his arm around his wife, the latest in a line of women who believed success could buy character. My father, Robert Whitmore, sat at the head of the table watching Ethan with the pride he'd never once shown me. The image burned into my chest like acid. "Claire, dear," my father called, gesturing with his hand as if I were a distant acquaintance. "You're still doing that consulting thing, right?" I smiled politely. "Yes, Dad." "Oh well, Ethan just closed another deal with Tian Holdings," he said, pride swelling in his tone. His shoulders seemed to straighten as he spoke of Ethan's accomplishments. "Now that's real business." The laughter that followed was light and cruel, perfectly practiced. Real business. That was the phrase that haunted me the rest of the night. Because no one at that table knew that the consulting thing they mocked had already turned into a quiet investment group called Asteria Capital, a company that as of that week controlled 17% of Tian Holdings' offshore shares. But I didn't say a word. Silence has its own kind of power. Ethan rose to make a toast. His voice carried easily smooth and polished. "To my father, the man who built everything we have." "And to my family," he said, raising his glass. His eyes flicked toward me, a glint of mockery in their depths. "Even those still figuring things out." The room laughed again. A perfect echo chamber of privilege and pretense. I took a sip of my water. Champagne was for people who needed bubbles to feel important. As I sat there pretending to enjoy the evening, my phone buzzed quietly in my clutch. I glanced at the message beneath the tablecloth. "Naomi contract with Mr. Caldwell signed. First phase complete. You officially own controlling shares in Whitmore Development Group." I blinked once, then looked back at Ethan, still basking in the glow of his self-congratulation. So this was ironic, being dismissed by a man who didn't yet know he'd just signed away his empire to his little sister. Half an hour later, the dinner plates were cleared, and a jazz trio began to play near the stage. I excused myself, weaving through the maze of expensive suits and forced laughter. Ethan's voice caught me as I passed behind his chair. "Try not to spill anything on the guests, Claire," he said loud enough for the table to hear. These caterers have to work hard to earn their tips. A ripple of amusement spread across the group. I stopped. Slowly, I turned my head toward him. "You're right," I said evenly. A smile formed on my lips, cold and deliberate. Tips can make a big difference, especially when you're the one signing the checks. He frowned, not understanding, but before he could reply, a deep voice came from the doorway. "Ms. Whitmore," the man said. The room fell quiet. Every eye turned toward the tall figure in a tailored gray suit. It was Mr. Caldwell, chairman of the board at Harrison Equity Partners, Ethan's boss. "Good evening," I said softly, rising from my chair among the staff. Caldwell approached, his tone formal but respectful. "Forgive the intrusion, Ms. Whitmore. I wasn't aware you were attending. We have that call with the Singapore investors scheduled for tomorrow." Ethan's glass froze halfway to his mouth, his knuckles turning white as he gripped it. You know each other." Caldwell turned to him, brows furrowed. "Know her? She's your company's largest private stakeholder." The silence that followed was so sharp I could hear the clink of a spoon against porcelain. I met Ethan's stunned eyes and smiled faintly. "You were saying something about tips." The night unraveled from there. Whispers rippled through the guests like wind over glass. My father blinked, his mind working furiously to catch up. "Claire," he said slowly, "what is he talking about?" I placed my napkin on the table, smoothing it gently. "Asteria Capital finalized its acquisitions last quarter," I said. "We bought out several silent partners at Harrison Equity. Technically, that makes me your son's employer." Gasps. A dropped fork. Ethan's face was drained of color. "I didn't want to mix family and business," I continued calmly. "But it seems business has a way of finding family." For a moment, no one spoke. Then softly my father whispered, his voice a hushed echo of my own earlier words. "You built all that. Alone." I nodded. "Alone is underrated." Later, as the guests began to disperse, I walked outside onto the balcony. The city shimmered below, distant and cold. Behind me, through the glass doors, I could still see Ethan arguing with Mr. Caldwell, his voice tight with disbelief. The air smelled like rain and redemption. Naomi texted again. "You did it. They'll know by morning. The papers go public at 9. I slipped the phone back into my bag and exhaled. "Happy birthday, Dad," I murmured. Then I turned, leaving the ballroom, behind the laughter, the pity, the table I'd never been meant to sit at. Because from that night on, I wasn't asking for a seat. I was building the table. Power doesn't announce itself. It waits quietly until arrogance forgets to look over its shoulder. By the time the sun rose over the city the next morning, the headlines had already done the work for me. "Whitmore Heiress becomes silent power behind Harrison Equity." The words rolled across every financial network. CNBC replayed the clip from my father's birthday party on loop slow motion, on Ethan's stunned expression. By breakfast, the story had gone viral. Naomi called at 7. "Congratulations, boss," she said, her voice barely hiding her grin. "Half of Wall Street is trying to figure out who you really are." "I'm nobody," I said, staring out the window of my penthouse. The city below was a grid of ambition and exhaustion. "Let's keep it that way. Ghosts make the best investors." She laughed. "Still planning to stay invisible?" "For now," I said. "Let Ethan think it was luck." By mid-morning, I was in Asteria Capital's downtown office, a minimalist space with tall glass windows and a skyline that looked like it could be conquered. Marcus, my chief strategist, was waiting with 2 cups of coffee and a folder marked Riverstone Holdings. "They're expecting us to move today," he said. "Market's watching what you do next." "Then we give them a show," I replied, setting my bag down. We spent hours going over reports, analyzing every inch of Ethan's empire. Harrison Equity wasn't just overextended, it was bleeding quietly beneath the surface. Over-leveraged projects, inflated assets, blind confidence. "Your brother's good at building castles," Marcus said. "He just forgot to check if the sand was wet." I smiled faintly. "Then we'll wait for the tide." By noon, the financials networks were buzzing. Ethan was on television, his tone forced and confident, claiming full control of Harrison's direction. Naomi texted a link. He's pretending last night didn't happen. I typed back, perfect. Arrogance makes people predictable. Behind me, Marcus was already on another call. Phase 2 is ready, he mouthed. I nodded. Execute. Within the hour, Asteria quietly began acquiring smaller stakes in Harrison's subsidiaries through shell companies registered under different names. 7 in total. Each one discreet, untraceable. By the time the market closed, Asteria had silently increased its position from 17% to nearly 22%. No one noticed. Not yet. That evening I went to the one place no one would expect to find me, my father's townhouse. The house smelled of oak and pride. He was in his study, a tumbler of whiskey in hand, the newspaper spread out before him. He didn't look up when I entered. You embarrassed your brother last night, he said. I didn't mean to. I lied. He snorted. You've always been clever, Claire. But cleverness doesn't make you kind. Neither does favoritism, I replied softly. That made him pause. He looked up, eyes sharp. You've made your point. You have money, power, whatever it is you want. But don't forget who built this name. I'm not trying to destroy the family, I said. I'm trying to remind it who it belongs to. He studied me for a moment longer, then sighed. Your mother would have hated this war between you two. She would have hated being ignored more. His silence said everything. When I left, the city felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. I drove to the waterfront, parked, and walked along the pier. The wind carried the faint sound of traffic and the sharp scent of salt. My phone buzzed. Naomi again. Your brother just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Rumor is he's planning to buy back shares to push Asteria out. I smiled into the night. Let him try. Because what Ethan didn't know was that every buyback would be funded through a credit line his company didn't fully own anymore. Asteria did. The next morning, I watched the board meeting unfold through a private feed Mr. Caldwell had discreetly arranged. Ethan sat at the head of the long oak table, shoulders stiff, his charm cracking at the edges. Find out who's behind Asteria Capital, he snapped. I want names, numbers, everything. One of his executives stammered. Sir, they've hidden their holdings through offshore accounts. Luxembourg, Singapore, Delaware. Whoever they are, they know what they're doing. Ethan slammed his pen down. Then pay someone to find them, through the glass wall of my office. Marcus looked up from his laptop. He's panicking. Good, I said. Let him think the world's closing in. That afternoon, Naomi joined me at the office. She placed her phone on my desk, showing a headline. Who is Asteria Capital's mysterious female founder? You're trending, she said. I don't want to trend. You already are. Every woman in finance is quoting you. Revenge is best served on the balance sheet. That line from last night went everywhere. I didn't remember saying it, but it sounded like something I would. Naomi leaned forward. You've started something, Claire. People see you as a symbol. I sighed. Symbols are dangerous. People project onto them what they need, not what's true. So what's true? She asked. I stared at the skyline, the glass towers glinting like knives. That I'm not done yet. By the end of the week, Harrison Equity's stock had slipped 9%. Analysts speculated about instability, leadership, friction, hidden buyers. Ethan held another press conference trying to steady the markets. We are stronger than ever, he declared. Harrison Equity remains a family-driven company. I watched from my office, arms crossed. The word family tasted like rust. Marcus entered holding a tablet. We just finalized the acquisition of Northwell Partners. That's another 3% in indirect shares. Total, I asked. 25.6, he said, smiling. You're officially the largest stakeholder. I exhaled slowly. Then the clock starts now. He frowned. Clock Ethan doesn't know it yet, I said, but in 6 months he'll be reporting to me. That night I returned home to an empty apartment. The city hummed below, alive and unfeeling. I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window. The power I'd built should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like a weight pressing against my ribs. Naomi had once told me that revenge wasn't a destination, it was a detour. A beautiful one, but never the end. I looked down at the city lights and wondered if she was right. Then my phone buzzed again. A message from Mr. Caldwell. Ms. Whitmore Tian Holdings just initiated contact. They'd like to meet about a potential partnership. I smiled a slow, quiet curve of satisfaction. It seemed the empire was finally starting to notice its invisible queen. The first rule of survival on Wall Street is simple. Don't play fair play invisible. By the time I met the delegation from Tian Holdings, the world still thought of me as a lucky heiress who stumbled into fortune. I intended to keep it that way. The meeting took place in a private suite overlooking Lake Michigan, the kind of room that smelled like old money and quiet deals. I wore black clean lines, no jewelry. My armor was anonymous. Across the table sat Mr. Liang, chairman of Tian Holdings, his expression polished into neutrality. Next to him, a translator. Behind him, two men in dark suits, silent as shadows. Ms. Whitmore. He began, his accent precise, his tone unreadable. You've caused quite a stir. I smiled slightly. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Liang's gaze sharpened. Your company, Asteria Capital, now owns 25% of Harrison Equity. That's not a stir. That's a takeover. I met his stare without blinking. Takeover is such a dramatic word. I prefer influence. He leaned back. Influence is temporary. Ownership is permanent. Which are you after? For a moment I let silence do the work. Then I said softly, Auth. Naomi sat beside me, her laptop open but untouched. The numbers were already memorized. Tian Holdings has an interest in expanding its U.S. portfolio, I continued. But your previous partnership with Harrison Equity was disappointing. Liang's lips twitched. Your brother made promises he couldn't keep. Then make a deal with someone who can. He studied me, his fingers tapping once against the table. What are you offering Ms. Whitmore control? I said. Quietly, efficiently. You'll retain 20% of the equity, but Asteria will manage operations. No board interference, no public filings. Liang glanced at his translator, who nodded slightly. You're proposing a shadow merger. Call it whatever makes you comfortable, I said. You'll profit. I'll clean the mess. Everyone wins. The room went still. Then Liang chuckled softly. You sound like someone who's been underestimated. All my life, I said. 2 hours later, the preliminary agreement was signed. The partnership would give Asteria a direct hand in the restructuring of Harrison's international portfolio. As we left the suite, Naomi grinned. Congratulations, CEO of Harrison Equity's new shadow parent company. Keep your voice down, I said. The ink isn't dry. She smirked. You know what I love about you, Claire? You're terrifying when you're calm. I'm not calm, I replied. I'm calculating. By the end of the week, Ethan was on every business channel again, still pretending everything was fine. His voice carried that same easy arrogance. Our partnerships remain solid, he said in one interview. The market is confident in our leadership. I muted the TV before he finished the sentence. Marcus walked in, setting a folder on my desk. He's blind. You've already taken half his chessboard. I flipped the folder open. Inside were screenshots of stock filings Tian Holdings' U.S. subsidiaries had quietly transferred their shares into Asteria-controlled trusts. When the board realizes who owns them, Marcus said, Ethan's done. He won't realize, I said. Not until I let him. That night I received a call from my father. His voice was low, sharp. Claire, what the hell are you doing? I hesitated. Good evening to you too, Dad. Don't play coy. You've made a deal with Tian Holdings, the same people your brother has been negotiating with for months. Apparently they preferred my terms. This isn't a game, he snapped. You're turning your family into a headline. I stared out the window, the city lights blurring in the glass. We were already a headline. I'm just rewriting it. Ethan may have his flaws, he said, his tone softening, but he's still your brother. Then he should have remembered that before he treated me like the hired help. Silence. Then quietly, your mother would have wanted peace between you two. Peace doesn't build companies, I said, and hung up before he could answer. 2 days later, Naomi burst into my office, breathless. "You're not going to believe this. Harrison's stock just jumped 10%. I frowned. "On what news?" She turned her laptop toward me. A new press release blinked across the screen. Ethan Whitmore announces strategic partnership with Tian Holdings. My jaw tightened. He's trying to spin my deal as his. "Can he do that?" Naomi asked. "For now," I said, standing. "But tomorrow we'll see who Tian Holdings answers to." That night I called Mr. Liang. He answered on the first ring. "Mr. Liang," I said calmly, "I see Ethan announced your partnership publicly." A pause, then a soft chuckle. "Yes, I noticed that as well. You didn't correct him. I saw no need. The truth always reveals itself eventually. Still, I said I'd like the timeline to move up." "I understand," he said. "The board meeting is Monday. You'll have your moment then." Monday morning, I walked into the Harrison Equity headquarters for the first time in years. The marble floors gleamed like mirrors. Employees glanced at me curiously, uncertain whether to greet or avoid me. Naomi whispered, "They think you're here for a PR shoot." "Good," I said. "Let them." In the boardroom, Ethan was already seated at the head of the table, surrounded by directors and analysts. He didn't look up when I entered. "Claire," he said coolly, "this is a closed meeting." "Then you'll want to keep it open," I replied, setting a folder on the table. "You'll need this." He finally met my gaze, irritation flickering behind his composure. "What is this, the new ownership structure?" I said. "Effective as of last week." Caldwell, sitting at the far end of the table, adjusted his glasses and flipped through the pages. His expression changed. "Ethan, she's right. Asteria Capital now holds the majority of Tian's U.S. shares." The silence that followed was seismic. Ethan's face drained. "That's impossible." "Impossible," I said softly. "No, just invisible." I watched the realization hit him like a wave. His empire, our father's empire, was no longer his. He pushed back from the table, standing. "You've been planning this for months." "Years," I corrected. "Why Claire?" "For revenge." "No," I said, "for balance." He laughed bitterly. "You sound just like Dad. I sound like someone who learned from watching him favor you over me." The directors exchanged uneasy glances. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should reconvene after reviewing the documents." But the meeting was already over. Ethan knew it. As I gathered my papers, I looked at him one last time. "You taught me something, Ethan. You said power belongs to those who take it." I just finally listened. Then I turned and walked out, the sound of my heels echoing through the marble hallway, each step erasing years of silence. Outside, Naomi waited with a car idling by the curb. "How did it go?" I opened the door and smiled faintly. "We just changed ownership." That night, as the city lights flickered against the glass, I stood alone in my office. My reflection stared back at me, steady, unblinking. The phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Congratulations, boss. Harrison is officially under Asteria control." I set the phone down, my pulse steady, my mind quiet. It was done. But somewhere deep inside, under the calm, I could feel it. The beginning of something darker than victory. Victory is loud, only to the people who didn't earn it. To those who did, it's quiet, eerily quiet. 2 days after the takeover, Harrison Equity's building buzzed with rumors. The boardroom whispers had leaked to the press, and by morning the story was everywhere. Mystery CEO behind Asteria Capital takes control of Harrison Equity. Employees paused mid-email to refresh their feeds. Investors demanded answers. Analysts speculated on television, their voices bouncing between admiration and fear. And Ethan hadn't been seen in 48 hours. Naomi arrived at my office with 3 lattes and a grin that couldn't be contained. "You're officially the most searched woman on Wall Street." I didn't look up from the documents. "That's not something to celebrate." "Oh, come on," she teased. "You just dethroned a man who's been on the Forbes cover twice, and now I'll be on his enemies list." She sat down, lowering her voice. Caldwell called. He wants to schedule a board meeting to confirm leadership transitions. His words. Which means damage control. Which means they're terrified, she said. I finally looked up. Good. Let them be. At noon, Marcus came in with a stack of files. We've uncovered something ugly, he said, his tone clipped. What kind of ugly? He spread the papers across my desk, transaction logs, off-book accounts, shell corporations that all traced back to Ethan. He's been siphoning money through a Hong Kong subsidiary for 3 years. About $70 million unaccounted for. Naomi swore softly. He's been using company funds. I felt the chill crawl up my spine. He was always reckless. But this? Marcus leaned forward. If this goes public, Harrison's reputation will implode. The board will demand prosecution. I stared at the numbers, feeling something colder than anger. It wasn't victory, but a profound, hollow emptiness. The truth was uglier than any of his lies. Let them, I said. My voice was a flat line devoid of emotion. Let the world see who their golden son really is. The next day, the board convened. Mr. Caldwell was there, calm as ever, flanked by attorneys. I entered the room in silence, Naomi and Marcus following. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. Ms. Whitmore, Mr. Caldwell said, gesturing to the head of the table, please sit. I did. Ethan wasn't there. His chair remained empty, a ghost of arrogance lingering in the leather. Caldwell began. We're here to address the leadership structure following the recent transition of majority control to Asteria Capital. As of this morning, the firm acknowledges Ms. Claire Whitmore as the controlling shareholder. Murmurs rippled across the room. Some were congratulatory, others resentful. Then Mr. Caldwell's voice sharpened. There is also the matter of financial irregularities under the previous CEO. The room stilled. I slid the documents forward. You'll find the relevant transfers and account details there. The directors flipped through the pages, gasping, breaking the silence. One of them whispered, "This could bring the SEC down on us." Which is why we need to act first, I said. Announce an internal audit, distance the company from his actions, and stabilize investor confidence. Caldwell nodded slowly. That would protect the company, but it will destroy Ethan. I met his gaze. He destroyed himself. By the time the meeting ended, I was drained. The board had voted unanimously to begin the audit. The official statement would go out by morning. Outside, the winter wind cut through my coat as I stepped into the street. Naomi hurried beside me. You did what had to be done. I know, I said quietly. But knowing doesn't make it feel better. She hesitated. You could still call him. Warn him before it hits. No, I said. He wouldn't have warned me. That night I couldn't sleep. The city lights carved silver lines across my ceiling. My mind replayed every moment: Ethan's smirk, my father's silence, the way my family had measured worth by who sat closest to power. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and stood by the window, staring at the skyline I'd conquered. It should have felt triumphant. It didn't. The phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Claire Ethan's voice came through hoarse, raw. So it's true. Depends which part you mean. You leaked it, he said. The accounts, the transfers. You're trying to bury me. I'm not burying you, I said evenly. You dug the hole yourself. Do you know what they'll do to me when this breaks? I know what you did to me when no one was watching. There was silence. Then quietly, I was trying to keep the company afloat. You don't understand what it's like to have everything on your shoulders. Don't tell me about weight, I said. I carried this family's shame for years. You just carried its ego. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my pulse pounding. Somewhere in the city's underbelly of glass and steel, my brother was unraveling. The next morning, the story broke. Harrison Equity, under investigation for financial misconduct. Ethan's name was everywhere. The stock plunged 15% before noon. Caldwell called to assure me it was temporary. We'll recover once the market sees you've stabilized leadership. But I could hear the concern in his tone. At midday, the reporters gathered outside Asteria's tower. Cameras flashed as I stepped out of the elevator. Questions hurled through the cold air. Did you expose your brother? Are you taking over permanently? Is this revenge? I didn't answer any of them. Inside the car, Naomi looked at me. They'll paint you as the villain now. Maybe that's what I need to be, I said. That evening, a package arrived at my office, no return address. Inside was a framed photo, me and Ethan as children standing on the docks behind our childhood home. His arm around my shoulder, both of us grinning, sunburned, invincible. Underneath it, a note in his handwriting, "You win. I hope it's worth it." I set the photo on my desk and stared at it for a long time. The girl in that picture looked like someone I didn't know anymore. Her smile was bright, unguarded. She hadn't learned yet that the world measured your worth by how much you kept hidden. My hands were no longer a child's, but a strategist's, and they trembled not from fear, but from the weight of all the things I'd broken to get here. Marcus came in quietly. The board wants you to step in as acting CEO until the audit's done. I nodded. Fine. Claire, he said carefully, if this continues, Ethan might be criminally charged. I looked back at the photo. Then he'll finally face what the rest of us had to. When everyone left for the night, I sat alone in the dark, the city humming outside. For the first time, I realized the truth I hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't about justice either. It was about control. And the terrifying thing about control is that once you have it, you never really feel free again. The silence after a victory is the loudest sound in the world. It hums beneath the skin, demanding to be filled with triumph, with guilt, with something that proves the battle was worth it. 3 days had passed since Ethan's name was erased from every boardroom door, and the world had already moved on to its next scandal. Harrison Equity was mine. The empire that had once excluded me now bent under my signature, but the taste of power was dry metallic. Naomi stood by the glass wall of my office, watching the sun crawl between the skyscrapers. "You haven't gone home since the audit results came in," she said. "You're running on caffeine and anger." "I've survived on less," I said, flipping through the morning's headlines. "Whitmore heiress restores investor confidence. Asteria Capital's visionary CEO." They wrote about me like I was both the storm and the shelter. Naomi crossed her arms. "Ethan hasn't been seen since the news broke. Mr. Caldwell says he's in London." "He'll come back," I said. A strange cold satisfaction settled in my stomach. "He always does when there's something left to salvage." She hesitated. And if there isn't, I didn't answer. Some part of me didn't want there to be. The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Whitmore, there's a Mr. Caldwell here to see you." I looked up. "Send him in." He entered with the calm of a man who'd seen too many corporate wars to be impressed by any of them. "You've stabilized the company," he said without preamble. "Investors are breathing again. But there's another matter we need to address." He slid a folder across the desk. The name on it froze me. Robert Whitmore Foundation. My father's charitable front, the one he'd built decades ago, the same one Ethan used for tax optimization. Caldwell's tone was neutral. "The foundation's accounts are tied to several offshore structures. If the regulators dig deeper, they might connect it to your brother's missing funds." I leaned back slowly. "You're saying my father's legacy could fall with Ethan's?" He nodded once. "And by extension, yours." I ran my thumb over the edge of the folder. "Clean it," I said. Quietly. Caldwell's expression flickered respect, maybe fear. "You're becoming efficient at this." "Efficiency," I said, "is just morality with better math." When he left, Naomi exhaled sharply. "You're covering for your father." "I'm covering for the name," I said. "Without it, none of this stands." She looked at me, searching. "At what point do you stop paying for his sins, when they stop costing me interest?" That night the city looked different. Colder. I attended a charity gala, ironically, for the same foundation now under quiet investigation. Cameras flashed as I entered the ballroom. People smiled, masks of grace hiding sharp curiosity. "Ms. Whitmore," someone called. "Is it true you'll be expanding the foundation's reach internationally?" I smiled. "We're not expanding. We're rebuilding." The applause came too easily. They loved a redemption story. It made them feel safe. Across the room, I caught a glimpse of Marcus talking to a group of analysts. He looked up, gave me a small nod. Everything was under control or close enough to look like it. Then a familiar voice behind me said, "You wear the crown well." I turned. Ethan stood there, thinner, paler, but still somehow composed. His eyes were bloodshot, and he held a drink he wasn't touching. "You have nerves showing up here," I said. "I was invited," he replied, holding up a folded invitation. Apparently the Foundation still believes in family. The air between us thickened. "You should leave." "Relax, Claire. I'm not here to ruin your party. I came to tell you something." I glanced around, forcing a smile for the cameras still circling. "Make it quick." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You're not saving the family name. You're burying it. That foundation you're trying to protect, it's worse than you think." "I know because I helped him hide it." "Dad didn't just hide money there. He hid people." I froze, my forced smile stiffening on my face. "What are you talking about?" He leaned in, his voice a tight whisper, a confession spoken only to me. "There were shell companies that funded political campaigns, offshore properties under aliases. Mr. Caldwell knows. He was part of it." My pulse quickened. "You're lying." He smiled, a tired kind of pity in his eyes. "Why would I lie now, Claire? I've already lost everything. The only thing left to lose is the one thing you're trying to save. You always were good at math, Claire. Follow the numbers." Then he turned and disappeared into the crowd. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. The city through the window was enough. I poured a drink, sat on the couch, and opened my laptop. The Foundation's records were buried deep encrypted behind layers of propriety. But Ethan had never lied about numbers. Within an hour, I found them: payments routed through shell accounts, fake consultancies, transfers to names that didn't exist, and Mr. Caldwell's signature on 3 of them. I sat back staring at the screen. The room felt smaller. The air is thinner. The victory I had just felt a moment ago evaporated, completely replaced by a cold, hard dread. Naomi's voice came through the intercom. "You're still at it. I found something," I said. "Something bad." She came in quietly, eyes scanning the monitor. "Oh my God. That's federal-level corruption." "Worse," I said. "It's familial." "What are you going to do?" I looked at her. "Burn it clean. Claire, if you expose this, your father's name will be destroyed. The Foundation, Harrison, everything." I closed the laptop. Maybe it's time it burns. The next morning I called Mr. Caldwell. "We need to talk," I said. He arrived within the hour, calm as always. But when I showed him the documents, the calm cracked. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "It doesn't matter. I need to know if it's true." He hesitated, then nodded once. "Your father made deals, expedient ones. He thought he was protecting the company. I cleaned up what I could. Did Ethan know enough to get reckless?" he said, "but not enough to understand the cost." I stared at him. "And what about me?" "You let me walk right into it. You were never supposed to find out," he said simply. I laughed, sharp, bitter. "That's the story of my life." That afternoon I stood before the Foundation's board. The same people who once dismissed me now watched with wide eyes as I placed the documents on the table. "This," I said, "is the truth. We've been funding shadows for years. That ends today." One of the directors stammered. "Claire, if this goes public, we'll lose everything." "Then we'll lose it honestly," I said, echoing my own words from another lifetime. "And we'll start again." The vote passed in silence. The Foundation would dissolve by week's end. When the meeting ended, Naomi found me outside on the steps of the building. "You did it," she said softly. "No," I replied. "I ended it." She tilted her head. "Is there a difference?" I looked at the skyline where the sun was slipping behind the towers. There used to be. That night, Ethan called again. "So you found it?" "I did." "And you burned it down?" "Yes." There was a pause. "Then I guess we're both orphans now." "Maybe that's what freedom looks like," I said. He chuckled softly. "You sound just like Mom." When the line went dead, I stood there a long time, phone still in hand. Outside the city pulsed a live, relentless reborn. Maybe Naomi was right. Maybe victory always came with a price. And maybe I was finally ready to pay for it. The morning after the collapse, I woke up to silence. No messages, no calls, no Naomi knocking on my door with fresh coffee and bad news. The city outside felt distant, muffled, as if even Chicago didn't want to touch what I'd become. The television flickered in the background. Every channel told the same story: Harrison Equity in freefall, investors panic as CEO faces internal power struggle. My face was everywhere. Serious cold cropped into headlines I didn't write. I turned the screen off. Silence again. Then a knock on the door. When I opened it, Ethan stood there. Pale, hollow-eyed. No bodyguards, no arrogance, just the brother I barely recognized. "I need to talk," he said. I stepped aside. "You've got 5 minutes." He walked past me. His suit wrinkled, his hands trembling slightly. "They took it from both of us," he said. "Tian Holdings sold to another group. Offshore. Anonymous. They're calling it a private acquisition." "I know," I said quietly. "I got the letter last night." "Then you know we're finished," he snapped. "They used us, Claire. Both of us." I studied with him. "You mean me?" I said. "You built this house of cards, Ethan. I just inherited it when the wind came." He shook his head. "You think this is still about me? It's not. It's about power. You thought you could control them. You never controlled anything. You were just their perfect distraction, a woman with a story the press couldn't stop eating." His words hit harder than I wanted them to. I turned away. "Then why are you here?" "Because," he said, voice breaking, "you're the only person left who knows how to fix it." We sat at the table, the same one we'd shared as kids, when Dad was still alive, when competition hadn't poisoned everything. Ethan slid a flash drive across the wood. "Everything I have on Tian's Holdings, emails, transfers, names, enough to expose them." I looked down at it, then back at him. "You're asking me to help you." My motive was not to help him. It was a cold, calculated decision. He was a sinking ship, and I was holding a map to the lifeboats. If I could get his information, I could save myself and my company. My heart felt nothing for him, just the sharp, logical need to survive. "Because," he said softly, "you're still my sister." For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then I slipped the flash drive into my pocket. "You get one chance," I said. "Don't waste it." By noon, I was in Asteria's command room, the screens alive with data. Naomi sat beside me, exhausted but focused. "So now we're teaming up with the man who caused this mess?" she asked. "Only long enough to clean it," I said. Marcus appeared with coffee and a grim smile. "The more we dig, the worse it looks. Tian wasn't just moving money they were laundering through shell acquisitions tied to a fund in Singapore. That fund belongs to Meridian Global." My pulse quickened. "Meridian. The hedge group that's been shorting our stock for weeks," the same Marcus said. "And they just filed paperwork for majority control." "So it's a hostile takeover," Naomi said quietly. Marcus nodded. "They're using our own losses as leverage." I stood, adrenaline sparking through the fog of exhaustion. "Then we hit them first." Naomi blinked. "With what?" "We're running out of allies, Claire." "With truth," I said. "We leaked the data. Everything Tian Meridian, the shell transfers. Make it public before they can spin it." Marcus frowned. "That's nuclear." "If this backfires, it won't," I said, slipping the flash drive into my laptop. "I've been playing by their rules for too long." The file opened like a confession. Names, numbers, encrypted emails, proof of a network stretching across continents. Money moved in circles so perfect it made deceit look elegant. Naomi watched as I uploaded the data into an anonymous server. "Where's it going?" "Everywhere," I said. Financial Times, Reuters, SEC, Tipline. Even the forums. She swallowed. "Once you hit send, there's no going back." I hovered over the key. Maybe that's the point. Click. The room filled with the hum of servers and the faint buzz of inevitability. 2 hours later, the world was on fire. News alerts pinged faster than we could read them. International leak exposes billion-dollar laundering ring. Meridian Tian Holdings, under investigation. I stared at the screen as the dominoes fell. Stocks plummeted, executives scrambled, governments issued statements. For once, Harrison Equity wasn't the villain, it was the whistleblower. Naomi turned to me, stunned. "You did it." I nodded slowly. "No," I said. "We just survived." That night Ethan called. His voice was raw but steadier. "They're finished," he said. "Meridian's CEO just resigned. Tien's frozen half their assets." I leaned against the window, watching the city lights blur through the rain. "You sound relieved." "I'm tired," he said. "But I owe you one. Maybe more than one." "Don't," I said softly. "We're even now." He hesitated. "What happens next, I'll rebuild," I said. "And you disappear." He laughed weakly. "You really don't forgive, do you?" "Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting." The line went quiet. Then just before hanging up, he said, "Mom would have been proud." For the first time that night, my throat tightened. When the call ended, I stood there for a long time, watching the rain streak down the glass. The storm outside matched the one inside my chest, relief and emptiness tangled together. Marcus appeared in the doorway. "The markets are stabilizing. You've got the board's support. For now." I nodded. "And the investors? They'll forgive a hero faster than a scandal." I smiled faintly. "Then we'll give them a story worth forgiving." He started to leave, then paused. "You know you could walk away now. Let it all go." I looked back at the city, the skyline glimmering like 1,000 sharp edges. "I didn't fight this hard just to walk away," I said. "But maybe I'll fight differently." When the office finally emptied, I sat alone at my desk. The servers hummed softly, their green lights blinking like tiny heartbeats. On the wall, the framed photo of Ethan and me as children caught a sliver of moonlight. For the first time, I didn't feel angry when I looked at it. Just memory. I picked up my phone, scrolled through the endless stream of headlines, and stopped at one that made me pause: the Whitmore woman who brought down giants. I turned off the screen and whispered to the empty room, "Not giants, just ghosts." Then I closed my laptop, exhaled, and for the first time in years slept without fear. The morning after the storm, the world looked quieter. But it wasn't peaceful, not yet. It was the silence that comes after an explosion, when the smoke hasn't settled, and no one's sure who's still standing. I woke to sunlight spilling through the glass walls of my apartment, the kind of golden light that made the city look almost forgiving. My phone was already buzzing. Naomi, of course. "Congratulations," she said as soon as I answered. "You're officially the woman who broke Wall Street." I rubbed my temples. "That's one headline away from being the woman they'll try to destroy next." "You didn't just survive, Claire," she said. "You redefined the game. Tien's board resigned overnight. Meridian's under federal investigation. Even the SEC called you a hero for exposing them." I walked to the window, watching the lake glitter under the morning sun. "Heroes don't usually get subpoenas," I said. "They won't come after you," Naomi assured me. "You didn't just play by the rules, you rewrote them." I didn't answer. The truth was, I wasn't worried about the law. I was worried about what came after power. By midday, the office was buzzing again, a strange mix of relief and fear. Harrison Equity's stock had begun to recover. Investors called non-stop. Journalists begged for interviews I wouldn't give. Marcus met me outside the boardroom, tablet in hand. "The press wants a statement. Something public to close the chapter." "I don't owe them closure," I said. He gave me a look. "You might owe it to yourself." I glanced through the glass wall at the board waiting inside. They looked expectant, nervous, like worshippers unsure whether their god would appear. "Fine," I said. "Let's give them their statement." When I walked into the room, the conversation stopped. Cameras blinked, lights glared, and someone handed me a microphone. "Thank you for coming," I began, voice steady but quiet. "The last few months have tested this company and me more than anyone could have imagined." I saw Caldwell in the corner, arms crossed, watching me carefully. "I didn't start this war," I continued, "but I finished it. Not for revenge, but for survival. For every woman who's been told to wait her turn. For every person who's been underestimated, dismissed, or forced to sit at the back of the table." I paused. The silence was deep electric. This company will rebuild. It will rebuild with transparency, with fairness, and with integrity. Because wealth without conscience isn't legacy, it's rot. Someone in the room clapped. Then another. The sound swelled until it filled the air like thunder. When I stepped off the stage, Naomi grabbed my arm, eyes bright. "You just turned justice into a brand." I smiled faintly. "Let's make sure it sells honesty, not hype." Later that afternoon, I drove to my father's townhouse for the first time since the fallout began. The house looked smaller somehow, as if time had been peeling it away piece by piece. He was sitting in the study, the same place he'd once lectured me about ambition. His hair was whiter now, his posture slower, but his eyes were still sharp. "You made quite a mess," he said, not unkindly. "I cleaned a bigger one," I replied. He gestured for me to sit. "I watched your speech. You sounded like your mother." I froze for a moment. She'd have hated the spectacle. She'd have hated the lies more, he said. "You did what none of us could. You tore the rot out by its roots." I looked at him, uncertain whether it was approval or surrender. "You always believed Ethan was the legacy." He sighed. "And I was wrong. You were the one building while everyone else was performing." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close enough to hurt. That evening I walked along the lakefront coat collar up against the wind. The city glowed behind me, full of people who'd never know my name beyond the headline. Naomi had texted again photos of the office celebrating glasses raised. "You did it. It's over." But she was wrong. Because under the calm I could feel it, the quiet shift of consequence. Power leaves an echo, and mine was still rippling through the world. I passed a newsstand and saw my face on the cover of Forbes, the woman who redefined power. I stared at it for a long time. The woman on the page looked unbreakable, untouchable. But I knew better. I'd broken plenty of things to get here. Some of them wouldn't heal. When I returned home, the city had gone still again. My penthouse was spotless cold. On the table sat a single envelope, no return address. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a handwritten note. "We saw what you did. You were never supposed to win. But you did. Let's talk about what comes next." No signature. Just an embossed symbol, a stylized M, the same mark I'd seen on Meridian Global's documents. I felt a chill run down my spine. They weren't finished. The phone buzzed almost immediately. Naomi again. "Did you get something?" "Yes," I said, staring at the letter. "An invitation. From ghosts. What does that mean?" The question hung in the air, a challenge. My mind, which had been so focused on ending, suddenly whirred with new calculations. This wasn't a threat of a new war. It was an offer to join one. The fear was there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by something else, a thrilling, dangerous curiosity. I had spent so long reacting, dismantling. Now I had the chance to step into the quiet, invisible power I'd only seen from the outside. My fingers, which had been so steady and sure on the battlefield, now felt a faint, nervous hum. "It means," I said softly, "the war isn't over. It just changed hands." I poured a drink and stood at the window watching the dark waves crash against the shore. Somewhere out there, unseen players were already rebuilding what I'd destroyed, shifting pieces on the board while the world congratulated me for ending the game. Ethan once told me, "Power never disappears, it just changes owners." He was right. I raised the glass toward the city, the skyline gleaming like a crown of fire. "Your move," I whispered. And as the lights blinked back one by one, it almost felt like the city was answering. The letter sat on my desk all night, its paper heavier than it looked. The embossed M seemed to shimmer under the lamplight like it was breathing. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. Those 3 words. "Let's talk about what comes next." By morning, Naomi had already read my mood through a text. "What happened? You sound off." I didn't reply. I just sent her a photo of the letter. Within 10 minutes, she was at my apartment, hair unbrushed, caffeine in hand. "Meridian," she said, pacing. "They're reaching out to you." I nodded. "Whoever's left of them." They don't reach out, Claire. They buy blackmail or Barry. This isn't a conversation, it's a test. I walk to the window, the city waking beneath the winter sun. Then I'll treat it like one. Naomi exhaled. You're actually going to meet them, aren't you? I need to know what they want. What if they want you gone? I turned back to her. Then they'll find I don't leave quietly. The meeting was set for that evening. The address was handwritten at the bottom of the note. Pier 46, Warehouse 7. No company name. No time zone confusion. Just a place where secrets could be spoken without witnesses. Marcus insisted on coming. You're not walking into that alone, he said, slipping a small earpiece into his jacket. If this goes sideways, it won't, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Naomi gave me a look. That's what you said before? TN Holdings nearly ate you alive. This is different, I said quietly. This time, they want something. The pier was nearly empty when I arrived, the air sharp with salt and cold metal. The water below was dark, rippling in silence. A single black sedan waited near the entrance to the warehouse. A man stepped out. He was in his 60s. Tall silver hair cropped short. No introduction, no handshake, just a nod toward the door. Ms. Whitmore, he said. They're expecting you. Inside the warehouse had been transformed. Long tables, screens flickering with data, the hum of servers hidden behind temporary walls. It looked more like a command center than a meeting. At the far end, a woman stood waiting. Elegant, poised, dressed in gray silk. She turned as I approached, a faint smile on her lips. Claire Whitmore, she said, her accent faintly European. At last. And you are someone who appreciates your efficiency. She gestured toward the table. Please sit. I stayed standing. I'm not here for pleasantries. Of course not, she said, unfazed. Let's talk business. She introduced herself as Miranda Stone, a name I immediately recognized from a dozen boardrooms and merger rumors. Former CEO of Meridian's European division, rumored to have vanished after the scandal. Meridian was never destroyed, she said, pouring herself a glass of water. It evolved. The people who stayed wanted new leadership, someone who could navigate chaos, not drown in it. And you think that's me? I asked. She tilted her head. You exposed corruption, restructured. Harrison survived a media feeding frenzy and walked away richer. That's not survival, Ms. Whitmore. That's evolution. I folded my arms. You want me to join you? Not join, she said softly. Lead. For a moment, I couldn't speak. You're offering me Meridian. I'm offering you control of a new version of it, she said. Clean money, clean image. We've learned from our mistakes. We need someone with credibility, someone untouchable. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. You think I'm untouchable? She smiled. No one is. But you've made the world believe you are. That's good enough. The silence stretched. I could feel Marcus shifting slightly at the edge of my hearing, his voice low in the earpiece. Claire, this smells like a trap. Miranda leaned forward. You've spent your entire life building something to prove yourself to people who never deserved you. I'm offering you freedom from that. No board, no family, just power. Her words hit their mark. For years I'd clawed for legitimacy, for recognition from a world that saw me as an afterthought. And here it was offered like a crown. But crowns are always heavy. What's the catch? I asked. Every empire needs an enemy, she said simply. Yours is already built. You just have to play your part. When I left the warehouse, the air outside felt colder, sharper. Marcus was waiting by the car, expression grim. Well, they want me to run what's left of Meridian. His eyes widened. That's insane. I know. And I looked out toward the black water, the reflection of city lights trembling on the surface. And I told her I'd think about it. Marcus groaned. Claire, I'm not saying yes, I said. But if I'm going to fight them, I need to know what they're planning. You can't dismantle a system from outside its walls. He studied me for a moment. You sound like your brother. The words hit me harder than any insult. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach, a strange mix of pride and dread. He was right. Ethan had always talked about infiltrating the old guard, about playing the same ruthless game. But he did it for ego, for applause. I was doing it for something else, or so I told myself. A part of me, the part that had been humiliated at the birthday table, felt a flicker of perverse satisfaction. I was finally speaking their language. But the rest of me knew it was a dangerous, lonely path. I smiled faintly. Maybe that's why he failed. He wanted control. I want to understand. That night I couldn't shake Miranda's words. Every empire needs an enemy. The idea lingered like smoke twisting into something more dangerous. Naomi called around midnight. You met them, she said flatly. I did. And they want me to take over Meridian. Silence. Then softly, are you going to? I looked out over the lake, dark and endless. I don't know yet. Claire, she said, if you step into that, you'll lose everything you just fought for. Maybe, I said quietly. Or maybe I'll finally understand what I've been fighting against. When the call ended, I stood there alone, the city lights flickering across the water. Somewhere out there, Miranda was already waiting for my answer. And for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't sure which side of the story I wanted to be on anymore. Because sometimes after you fought your way out of the dark, you start to miss the power it gave you. The city was still asleep when I said yes. 3 words typed into an encrypted email at 4:22 in the morning, I'll take the meeting. The cursor blinked for a long time before I hit send, like it was asking if I was sure. I wasn't, but I sent it anyway. By sunrise, my decision was already in motion. Naomi's call came before I even made coffee. Tell me you didn't, she said, voice sharp with disbelief. I did. Claire, this isn't you testing the waters. This is you walking straight into a shark tank. I know how to swim, I said. Not with people like them. They don't negotiate, they devour. Her words echoed, but I didn't answer. Because deep down I knew she was right. And I was still going anyway. The meeting was set for that afternoon in the private penthouse of a downtown high-rise that had no name on the directory. Miranda's message was brief, bring no one. Phones stay at the door. When the elevator doors opened, the world changed texture. Soft white walls, black marble floors, air that smelled like money and command. Miranda stood by the window, dressed in slate gray, the skyline blazing behind her like a crown she already owned. Punctual, she said, smiling faintly. I like that. I didn't come to impress you, I replied. Good, she said. Then let's not waste time. She gestured it toward the table. 2 glasses of champagne, weighted bubbles rising in perfect rhythm. Meridian isn't what it used to be, Miranda began. The old guard's gone. The new structure is built on data anonymity and control. We don't make deals in daylight anymore. We make systems that outlast governments. You want me to be the face of that, I asked. She tilted her head. Not the face. The architect. And what happens when your architects stop following the plan? They disappear, she said calmly. I didn't flinch. That's honest. I prefer clarity, she said. You're not like your brother. He wanted recognition. You want permanence. That's rarer and more valuable. She slid a thin folder across the table. Inside was a contract written in legal poetry clauses, built like traps, promises disguised as offers. You'd retain full operational control, Miranda said. Meridian would provide global infrastructure. Think of it as a merger of might and precision. I skimmed the pages. The figures were staggering. This isn't an offer, I said finally. It's an empire. Exactly. Marcus would have told me to walk away. Naomi would have begged me to burn the papers before I even read them. But neither of them was here. And in that quiet, dangerous room, a part of me wanted to say yes, not for money, not even for revenge, but for the terrifying thrill of knowing I could. Miranda poured the champagne. You can end this story now, Claire, she said softly. No more press, no more scrutiny, just influence the kind that never fades. I stared at the bubbles rising in the glass, then set it down untouched. And what happens to the people who get in the way? She smiled, faint and cold. They become case studies. The room felt smaller suddenly, the skyline pressing in. I closed the folder and stood. You talk like influence is oxygen, I said. It is, she replied. You can't live without it. You've proven that. Her confidence was unsettling, but she wasn't wrong. Her words were a mirror, and I hated the reflection. My victory had been its own kind of cage. It had set me free from my family's ridicule, but it had bound me to a different kind of craving, a constant gnawing need to stay one step ahead, to always have the upper hand. She wasn't tempting me with something I lacked. She was offering me a purer, darker version of what I'd always wanted. She saw the truth I'd been hiding, that after so long fighting for a seat at the table, I was afraid of a world where there was no table to fight for. The thought of letting go felt like drowning. She understood this, and in that moment I understood her too. Miranda stepped closer, her voice low. Think about it, Claire. You've spent years cleaning up other people's corruption. Don't you want to design a system where you never have to? Freedom built on manipulation isn't freedom. It's the only kind that lasts. When I left the penthouse, the afternoon sun was blinding. I walked for blocks without realizing where I was going until I ended up at the river, watching the current twist beneath the bridges. Naomi found me there an hour later, breathless and angry. You went, didn't you? Yes. And they want me to take over the new Meridian. She froze. And what did you say? Nothing yet. Her voice dropped. Claire, if you even think about this, everything you've built, your integrity, your redemption, it's gone. You'll be just like them. I turned to her, tired, but calm. Maybe that's the point. Maybe being better doesn't fix anything. Maybe control is the only way to stop the next Meridian before it starts. Naomi shook her head. You sound like her. Maybe I finally understand her. She stared at me for a long moment, then whispered, If you take this deal, I can't follow you. I wouldn't ask you to. That night I stood alone in my office, city lights flickering across the glass like dying stars. Miranda's folder sat on my desk, the contract waiting for a signature that could rewrite everything. I poured myself a drink and stared at my reflection. Power had changed me. I could see it now, the steadiness in my eyes, the quiet ambition that hadn't existed before. My phone buzzed. A message from Miranda, the world is built by those who dare to stop asking permission. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. The wind outside howled against the windows, rattling the glass. I thought of my father's voice the night before his final board meeting when he'd told me power isn't about taking, it's about surviving what comes after you take it. I hadn't understood it then. I did it now, because whether I said yes or no, I'd already crossed the line. The only question left was how far I was willing to go before the darkness stopped feeling like home. The signature line stared back at me all night, a single horizontal slash that could erase the last 3 years of my life or define them forever. The contract lay open on my desk, Miranda's neat handwriting in the margins, her words echoing through my mind. Every empire needs a designer. Be the one who decides where the cracks go. I'd built an empire once, and I'd watched it rot. But now the temptation was different. It wasn't about reclaiming what I'd lost. It was about the possibility of never losing again. Naomi's voice broke through my thoughts. She was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression a blend of fear and fatigue. Tell me you're not still thinking about it. I'm thinking about everything I said. You mean you're rationalizing it? She shot back. You already know it's wrong. I turned toward her. What if wrong is the only way to keep the next wrong from happening, God? Listen to yourself, she said. That's exactly how they talk. I'm not them. Her voice softened. Not yet. For a moment the room felt smaller. The air heavy with all the things we'd been through, deals, betrayals, sleepless nights, victories that never felt like victories. Claire, she said quietly, you've already won. You exposed the corruption. You built something good. Don't burn it down for power you don't need. I stared out the window, the skyline glittering like a mirage. You think this is about need? It's about protection. Meridian isn't gone. If I don't step in, someone else will, and they'll be worse. Or maybe, she said, you've just forgotten who you were before all this. Her words stung not because they were cruel, but because they were true. When she left, I sat alone in the quiet, the city buzzing faintly below. I poured myself another drink more out of habit than I wanted. Then the intercom buzzed. "Ms. Whitmore, there's someone here to see you," my assistant said. I frowned. "Who?" "He says his name is Ethan." I hesitated, then pressed the button. "Send him up." He looked different. Leaner. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something like humility or exhaustion. He carried no briefcase, no pretense of success. Just a worn expression that told me he'd seen the same headlines I had. "You look terrible," I said, because I didn't know how to say. I was glad he was still alive. "You look powerful," he said, and for once it didn't sound like an insult. We stood there for a long moment, the silence between us thick with unfinished sentences. Finally, he said, "I heard about Meridian." "Of course you did," I said. "News travels fast when it smells like danger." He gave a humorless laugh. "They came to me first, you know. Before you. Offer me the same deal." I blinked. And I said no, he said simply. Not because I didn't want it, because I knew what it would do. He stepped closer. He didn't touch me, but the movement felt like an apology. "You're better than me, Claire. Don't become me." I turned away, unable to meet his eyes. "You don't get to lecture me about morality." "I'm not," he said. "I'm warning you. You think you can control people like Miranda? You can't. The moment you sign that paper, you stop being the person who fought her, you start being her." Something inside me cracked quiet, but deep. "Do you know what it's like," I said, "to build something from ashes and still be told you don't belong at the table?" He didn't answer. Instead, he simply reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it held the weight of all the years between us. "I spent years watching men like you get applauded for cleaning up messes you made yourselves. When I fix something, they call it ambition. When you do, they call it leadership." "I know," he said. "And I'm sorry." The words were simple, but they hit harder than I expected. He wasn't apologizing for our past, but for the system we were both born into. "You can't apologize for the world," I said. "No," he replied, "but I can remind you that you don't have to become one." He left without another word, and the silence that followed was unbearable. I looked at the contract again, the paper glowing faintly under the desk lamp. All it would take was one signature, one surrender. I picked up the pen. My hand hovered. And then I remembered something my mother once said back when success was just a dream we couldn't afford. "If they ever make you choose between being powerful and being free, choose the one that lets you sleep at night." The pen fell from my hand. By morning, I'd made my choice. I called Naomi first. "You were right," I said. "We're walking away." Her relief was audible. "Thank God." "I'm not destroying Meridian," I added. "I'm exposing it. Everything Miranda offered me, I'll use it against her." Naomi's breath caught. "You're going to leak the deal." "Not leak," I said. "Detonate." That afternoon I called Miranda. Her voice came smooth and cool over the speaker. "Claire, I take it you've made a decision." "I have," I said. "I'm not taking your deal." A pause. Disappointing but predictable. "I'm also sending your contract to the Department of Justice," I said, "and to every media outlet that covered our last war." Silence. Then a soft chuckle. "You really don't learn, do you?" "On the contrary," I said. "I've learned exactly what kind of monster you think I should be." Her tone hardened. "You won't survive this." "Maybe not," I said. "But neither will you." I hung up before she could reply. By evening, the files were public. The story broke faster than any before it. Meridian's hidden structure, its ties to offshore accounts, its infiltration of global markets. Within hours, their stock froze. Their board scattered. And Miranda Stone vanished. I sat in my office as the headlines rolled across the screens, the same city that once ignored me, now chanting my name like a symbol. Marcus came in quietly. "You did it." "No," I said softly. "I ended it." He nodded. "And what now?" I looked out at the skyline glowing gold against the dusk. "Now we rebuild again, but smaller this time. Cleaner." He smiled faintly. Think the world's ready for that? I thought of Naomi, of Ethan, of my father, of all the pieces that had to break before I learned what power really costs. No, I said. But I am. And for the first time in years, I felt something that had nothing to do with victory or revenge. Peace. It's strange how silence can sound like victory. The day after Meridian fell, the city woke up slower, quieter, as if the whole world was holding its breath. News anchors were still dissecting every piece of my statement, every sentence from the DOJ leak, every theory about who would rise next from the ashes. But for the first time in years, I wasn't watching. I didn't need to. I already knew the ending. I was in my office alone. The walls still hummed with the ghosts of a war I'd finally finished. The building had stopped feeling like a fortress. It was just glass and steel again. A place, not a battlefield. Naomi walked in without knocking, holding 2 coffees and a look that hovered between exhaustion and disbelief. You realize you just brought down the most powerful private equity network in the world? I nodded. Before breakfast. She laughed, but it sounded half like a sigh. You could have been anything, Claire. You could have taken the deal and ruled the world. And instead, I set it on fire, I said. Maybe it needed burning. She sat across from me. And now what I looked at her really looked at the woman who'd stood beside me through every storm, who had never flinched when everyone else did. Now we build something different. Her brows rose. You mean a company? No, I said. Something human. That afternoon I held the final board meeting of Harrison Equity. The directors filed in nervous and expectant, the smell of polished leather and fear heavy in the air. Ladies and gentlemen, I began the company you knew no longer exists. We're dissolving Harrison Equity as it stands. Gasps. Whispers. Mr. Caldwell's jaw tightened. Claire, be reasonable. You can't just— I can, I said calmly. And I am. What we built was profitable, yes. But it was poisoned by greed and silence. You all know it. You just learned to live with it. I didn't. One of the older board members leaned forward. Then what do you propose? A new foundation, I said. One focused on rebuilding small businesses, on ethical investment, on second chances. Call it penance. Call it realism. I call it evolution. The room fell quiet. You'll lose billions, Mr. Caldwell warned. Then we'll lose them honestly, I said. Money comes back. Integrity doesn't. After the meeting, I walked around the city for hours. The wind off the lake was cold, sharp enough to cut through thought. People passed by in coats and scarves, faces glowing with screens and noise, unaware that the balance of power had shifted beneath their feet. It was humbling in a way how the world kept spinning no matter who won or lost. I ended up in front of my father's old townhouse. It hadn't changed much. Same brick, same windows, same shadows behind the curtains. I almost walked away. But something stopped me. The door opened before I could knock. He stood there, older, thinner, but still proud. I saw the news, he said. I figured you would. He studied me. You did what I never could. I destroyed what you built, I said. He shook his head. No, you redeemed it. For the first time, there was no disappointment in his eyes, just a quiet kind of respect. We talked for a long while about business, about loss, about Mom, about the cost of legacy. When I left, the air felt lighter. That night I visited Ethan. His apartment was smaller now, tucked away in the quiet part of town. He opened the door with the same cautious expression he'd worn since our war began. I heard you finished it, he said. It's over, I replied. Meridian's gone. So is Harrison. He nodded slowly. You really did it. I didn't do it for revenge anymore, I said. I did it to stop the next version of us. He smiled faintly. Then you finally learned what Dad was trying to teach us. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I just learned that no empire is worth losing yourself for. He offered me a glass of wine. We didn't talk about the past after that. We didn't need to. Some things didn't need apologies, just endings. Weeks passed. The chaos faded. Reporters found new scandals. The market stabilized. I stopped checking the news altogether. A new chapter of my life had begun. The Asteria Renewal Foundation wasn't a corporate giant, but it was my most ambitious project yet. It was a blank slate. Naomi and I started small, pouring our initial capital into a handful of local businesses that had been crushed by the economic fallout. We didn't seek headlines or praise. Our work was quiet, focused on real people and tangible results. I learned the names of restaurant owners, artists, and innovators, the ones whose voices were often drowned out by the noise of Wall Street. This wasn't a game of chess. It was a delicate art of healing. My relationship with my father and Ethan also changed. They weren't a source of pain anymore, but a reminder of how far I'd come. We still saw each other not at lavish parties, but for quiet dinners. The silence between us was no longer full of resentment, but a shared understanding of the cost of power. My father's respect was no longer a prize to be won. It was a quiet, earned fact. And Ethan, in his own way, was starting his own journey of rebuilding. Naomi came into my office one morning with a grin. "The foundation's ready," she said. "You want to pick a name?" I thought for a moment, then said, "Asteria Renewal." She nodded. "Fitting. Rebirth after destruction." "That's all we ever do," I said. "We fall apart. Then we rebuild." Later that evening, I sat on the balcony, the city alive beneath me. Somewhere below, the hum of traffic sounded like breathing. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the article that had started it all, The Forgotten Whitmore Daughter. It was years old now, a relic of pity disguised as journalism. I smiled, then deleted it. The person in that headline no longer existed. Before I turned in for the night, Naomi texted me one last time. "The press wants to know if you'll do another interview. They're calling it The Woman Who Beat the System." I typed back, "Tell them I didn't beat it. I just stopped playing." As the city lights dimmed, I realized how far I'd come from the girl sitting with the caterers at my father's birthday to the woman who'd rewritten the rules of power. I wasn't the invisible one anymore. I was the author. And if there was one thing I'd learned from all of it, from betrayal, from revenge, from victory, it was that power isn't the opposite of weakness. It's the shadow of fear. You either let it own you or you learn to walk through it. So I closed the blinds, shut off the lights, and whispered to the dark, not as a confession, but as a truth earned the hard way, I'm not here to rule anymore. I'm here to rebuild. And somewhere beyond the skyline, where the first light of morning would soon break, it felt like the world was finally ready to start again. If you've stayed with me through this story, tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have taken the deal or walked away? Comment below, share your thoughts, and subscribe. Because sometimes the stories we tell each other aren't just about revenge, they're about finding our way back to being human again.